there is no question that everything that we have been talking about in terms of everything from criminal justice reform to climate change to immigration, this is now really on the line. There is no guarantee that we are any closer than ever before, and we may actually be further behind. It's a time to celebrate. We have to find this balance tonight. It's a time to celebrate for sure, but I think this is a night for, the fight call.
In the middle of celebrating a historic win of her own back in 2016, California Senator Kamala Harris braced for what is bound to be a lengthy fight against Donald Trump. Now, 3 years later, she's taken that fight to the campaign trail in hopes of replacing Trump as president. But despite having several breakout moments on the campaign trail and on the debate stage, Senator Harris has yet to have a major breakthrough in the polls. With just under 100 days until the Iowa caucuses and ample opportunity for any 2020 contender to gain traction, can she do it? Well, we will find out when Kamala Harris joins me next. And joining me now is California Senator and 2020 presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Senator Harris, great to see you.
Good Sunday morning, Joy. Good morning.
Happy Sunday morning. Okay, it is great to have you here. So I'm going to just start to rifle through these questions because I have a lot to ask you.
Okay.
I want to start with, I was just reading an interview in Yahoo News that you did in which you talked about the elephant in the room, as you called it, or you said the donkey in the room, that whenever
yes.
I'm sorry, it was an InStyle. So I read it through Yahoo News, but it was an InStyle magazine, in which you talked about the fact that whenever you've run for office, whether it's, to be Attorney General in a 40 million population state of California or running for president, you're told, not ready, black woman, I don't think the country is ready. I can tell you there is a lot of that out there, people being like, I don't know if in America that would elect Donald Trump would elect a black woman. What do you make of that, that fear that a lot of voters frankly have when it comes to you?
Well, Joy, I'm glad you brought it up, and I have been talking about it publicly because it is an experience I've had in every campaign that I have, and now here's the operative word, won. But it comes up in every office that I've run for. I have been the first, as United States Senator included, in only the second black woman in the history of the United States Senate. And so the conversation goes something like this: I don't know if America is ready for a woman of color to have this position. I'm ready, but I don't know if my neighbors are ready, right? That's how the conversation goes. And then it goes on to, I don't know if it's your time, if it's your turn, or, oh, it's going to be so difficult. And here's the thing. I then share with people the fact that this has come up in every campaign I have won to make a very big point, not about me, but about who the American people are. I know and I have seen that the people of our country have the ability to see what they've not seen before, to believe and have faith in what can be unburdened by what has been. And it is that belief and that faith and that ability to fight and not wait for somebody to give permission to say what's possible that fuels my campaign and my optimism, and really is what I know will lead us to become the nominee, the Democratic nominee for president.
Yeah, and people forget you were elected at the same time that Donald Trump was elected. That we played earlier a little bit of the speech that you gave to your staff when you were thinking, one step forward, one step back on that. You were also a very early endorser of then Senator Barack Obama when he ran for president, and the vast majority,
that's right, including
of black Democrats, were with Hillary Clinton, hardcore, really, until he won Iowa. I want to show you what the numbers look like right now in Iowa, because winning Iowa and convincing a mostly white state to support him changed the minds of a lot of black voters and got them on his side. So Elizabeth Warren right now is running on top there. Pete Buttigieg is second. Bernie Sanders is third. Joe Biden is fourth. You're right now running fifth in Iowa. Do you need to win Iowa in order to convince those same black voters that had doubts about Barack Obama?
First of all, you're right. I was I supported him when he ran for Senate. He supported me when I ran for re-election as district attorney. I was with he and Michelle and, a group of us when he announced in Springfield that he was running for president. And then I was there campaigning with him in Iowa during those caucuses that you're mentioning in 2007-8. And here's the thing. We need to place in Iowa. There is no question about it. And that's why I have virtually moved to Iowa. That's why we have an incredible team on the ground. We have been organizing. We have been signing people up to caucus for us. And I feel what's happening on the ground in Iowa, which is, the Iowan voters, just like you said, what they did with Barack, what they have done before. Iowans, I've found don't really pay attention to the polls. What they want to know is they want to sit down with you in their living room and have a serious talk. They can read, a mile away. The words start with a B and an S, and they want to have serious conversations about what is going on in their lives and the issues that keep them up at night. And that's my comfort zone. That's the place where I love being, which is having those interactions that are not about talking to somebody, one on 5,000, but one-on-one. And that's where we are, and that's why I think we're getting the support we're getting on the ground.
Just the structural nature of American politics is that Iowa and New Hampshire, two states that are not super diverse, go first. And then you have states like South Carolina and Nevada, which are much more diverse, watching to see what happens and sort of taking a pulse of what they think the electorate is going to look like. South Carolina, of course, a very heavily African-American primary. We're going to put up the poll there. You're actually now running fourth. And it's like a 60% black primary. So you're running fourth in that state, just behind Biden, Warren, and Sanders. You're in a better position there. And then there's a morning consult poll that's, bigger picture that you're running fifth in that's just out. So when you look at that, the question of how to get yourself ahead and get yourself into that top tier, what do you trace it to? What do you think is the reason why you are not in that top three?
So, first of all, the people who have been in the top three have been on the stage for, in some cases, decades. And the challenge for my campaign and for me is to introduce myself. But what we find is, one, and many people will talk about the fact that the majority of voters in these places that you have mentioned are undecided, even though they know the people in the top three.
Right. And
so what we find is that when we have the opportunity to introduce me and ourselves, that people come to us. And that's why I was in Nevada yesterday. I was hanging out with the culinary workers who are doing incredible work in Nevada, supporting and working for working families. I'm in Iowa today and talking with folks to introduce ourselves. And, but it is the challenge is that I've not been on the stage for decades. And so it is about a process of introduction and working hard to earn that support. And I invite people to know my background, which is that there are very few issues that are a subject of this election that I've not actually worked on, right? Mine has not been a career of giving lovely speeches. It has been about actually making very tough decisions on issues that impact people where they live and in a way that has a very direct impact on the lives and families of America. And so I invite people to go to KamalaHarris.org and be a part of our campaign, but it is a process of introducing ourselves, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and you and I both know that black women are the foundation of the Democratic Party's base, and often the determinant of who gets elected and who does not. You got a couple of key endorsements.
That's right.
Essence, yep, you got a Higher Heights endorsement, and we know Higher Heights. I know Glenda and those ladies very well who endorsed you.
Yes, they're extraordinary.
You actually won the Root Black Power Rankings this weekend. This weekend.
I know.
Hey, y'all should be reading it out there.
I'm very excited about that.
And the reason that
and Joy.
Yes.
And Joy, I also have the most endorsements from members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who are leaders, national leaders, around issues that range from the environment to what we need to do around the economy, but also are obviously leaders among the districts that have the largest black populations.
Yep.
So I'm very honored to have the endorsements that I have among the CBC.
Well, to go back to the Root for a second, I love those Black Power Rankings. I think they're really interesting because they talk specifically about what candidates are doing vis-a-vis the African-American community and black women and what is going to, really resonate. And one of the reasons that you did well there, you launched a plan to tie the school day to the work day. Talk a little bit about what that's about.
That's right. Yeah, so, my sister and I were raised by my mother, and we would come home from school, often hours before she came home from work. And we were blessed to grow up in a neighborhood and in a community where the community really treated the children of the community as the children of the community. We had a second mother who lived 2 houses down from us, and would take care of us, Miss Shelton. And but there are so many families that do not have that anymore. And so what is happening is children, as young as elementary school students, are coming home for hours by themselves, or their parents, concerned that they cannot take care of themselves, are quitting their jobs or losing time from work, which has a direct impact on those parents' ability to pay rent. And so I'm saying, look, we have to support working parents. So let's extend the day, not the school hours, but basically after-school programs, so that we have public schools available for our children to be there, engaged in constructive, playful activity, until their parents come home from work and can pick them up. Because if you look at this, it is women, and in particular women of color and black women, who are working mothers, who do not have the resources to be able to afford to go through commuting to work and all that costs, and then childcare, which in many places is more expensive than college tuition. And so we are setting families up for failure. And I look at so many of these issues through the lens of the way I was raised in my childhood. I know that I had the blessing of a community that could help take care of us, but so many families in America now do not and need to have that kind of support from our systems, and we just need to be smarter. So that's why I'm doing it. I'm very excited about it, and we're going to do a pilot where schools who want to take this on will get a federal grant of $5 million to come up with a design that is based on what the community wants and needs, but to keep the school doors open until 6 o'clock.
Let's talk a little bit about the criminal justice sort of realm here, because it's an important part of your campaign.
Yeah.
A lot of people see you as the person to prosecute Donald Trump, in theory, right? It is sort of what your message has been.
Yes.
But in terms of criminal justice, you've obviously been a DA, you've been an attorney general. You went down to Benedict College, and I thought I don't know if you can hear me. Hopefully the audio is good. You went down to Benedict College, and I think you had a moment down there where you refused to participate in an event in which Donald Trump had been honored by an organization that was not the college, but it was an organization that was a sponsor. And you said, well, you weren't going to participate in it. Your participation caused that organization to be removed as a part of that event. And then, oh, did we lose? Oh, I think we've lost our audio. Okay, so why don't we take a break? We're going to go take a break. We're going to try to get the senator's audio back, and then we'll resume on the other side. So stay right there. All right, we have fixed our audio issues, and we have Senator Harris back with us. I apologize for that, Senator. Thank you for sticking with us through it.
Problem.
Live TV. This is the way it is. Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about criminal justice. You had a moment at Benedict College when you refused to participate in an event in which Donald Trump was being honored with a criminal justice award. An interesting choice. And when you pulled out of that event, the organizers that had put that together also pulled out. Then you did come back. A lot of naysayers who said, you need the courage to participate. Well, you changed that event. You made that work. So that was, I think, a high moment for you on the criminal justice end. But you've also had some struggles on the issue of criminal justice, particularly with younger, progressive African Americans who aren't confident and who worry that a prosecutor, might not be the person that they trust the most when it comes to criminal justice. How do you answer that, and how do you win over younger progressives who are worried, we don't know about the prosecutor, we don't know?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Joyce. So first of all, the reason I pulled out of the event at Benedict College is because the students weren't involved. This is an HBCU. I am a proud graduate of Howard University and HBCU. And on the issue of criminal justice, where we know this system has been so informed by race and has really integrated policies that have been about, the result of mass incarceration of, in particular, black and brown men in America, the idea that they would have excluded these students from being a part of that program was just intolerable for me, which is why I pulled out. On the issue of this campaign and where I am on criminal justice, listen, I grew up a black child in America, and knowing the failure of the criminal justice system. There is not a black man I know, be he a relative or a friend, who has not been the subject of some kind of racial profiling or excessive force. So when I, as a child of parents who were active in the civil rights movement, made a decision to become a prosecutor, it was because I went in there with the intention of doing what I could from the inside to reform the system. And that is why I did, and also I know I'm not so good at asking permission. So I decided to go in where I could have the power to make decisions. And the decisions I made included creating one of the first in the nation programs that were around young people who had been arrested for drugs and getting them jobs. People said to me, "What are you doing? You're supposed to be putting people in jail, not letting them out." I said, "No, we have to reform this system." As Attorney General of California, I did one of the first in the nation requirements that the special agents, law enforcement, wear body cameras and keep them on full time. I created one of the first in the nation required training for police officers on racial bias. And I'm running for president, because I know this system from the inside, and I know the reform that needs to happen, which is why I have a whole initiative that is about what we need to do to end mass incarceration, and which includes sentencing reform, getting rid of mandatory minimums, what we need to do around expungements, what we need to do to shut down private prisons, what we need to do to require accountability from law enforcement, both police officers and prosecutors. In fact, I'm prepared to change the standard. So when we are talking about the force that a police officer uses, instead of asking, is it reasonable, we need to ask, is it necessary? And what I've done throughout my career to focus on women who are incarcerated and what we need to do to de-incarcerate women. Now, let me tell you, Joy, in this campaign, I challenge and I would ask that every person on that stage get asked a question about what they were doing in the late 1990s and the early 2000s to reform the system. Because I was there on the inside, pulling up my sleeves to do the work that was necessary. And it's all right for people to be on a debate stage in 2019 talking about what they're going to do. But I can talk to you about what I actually did. And yes, I decided, I chose a career that, yes, was going up the rough side of the mountain. I admit that. But I know also what we were able to accomplish, and there is still so much more to do, and that's one of the reasons I'm running.
I want to also get in a question to you about health care. We did a whole thing yesterday talking about the Medicare for All pitches. You're another candidate who is for Medicare for All. Oh no, can you hear me? Oh no, have we lost the senator? Have we lost her? Have we lost you? Oh, well, I guess we have lost the senator again. I apologize to Senator Harris. We had some bugaboos that were in the system this morning, but Senator Harris, thank you very much. Hopefully someone on your staff will hear me saying thank you for you being here. Hopefully we'll be able to bring you back and ask you more questions. All right, more AM Drive after the break.
I have a lot of respect for Mayor Buttigieg, but I do think that our experience level is different. You know, I don't need to go see South Bend. I saw 100 different cities when I was HUD secretary, right. And I was mayor of a city that's 14 times larger than South Bend. In fact, we could almost fit South Bend in our Alamo Dome in San Antonio.
The next Democratic presidential debate, hosted by MSNBC and The Washington Post in Atlanta, is just 10 days away. And these are the candidates who have qualified so far. Noticeably absent from the lineup is President Obama's former HUD Secretary, Julian Castro, who has struggled to gain traction in the national polls. A recent Telemundo poll even found that Castro, the sole Latino candidate, is in a three-way tie for 5th place among Latino voters, with only 2% support. So why is that? Is it him? Or is it us? Are he and other lower polling candidates failing to properly compete for attention in an extremely crowded field? Or is the media writ large failing to give all of the candidates equal attention because our profession has already declared the election a race between a small number of top-tier candidates? It's worth noting that even with the most diverse field ever, the top 4 candidates in the polls are all white, and with the exception of Senator Warren, are all men. And at least one of those candidates is promoting the narrative that this race is even narrower than it looks.
I think this is getting to be a two-way. It's early to say it. I'm not saying it is a two-way, but I think...
But you see that. You see it's coming into focus, you and Warren.
Yeah, and certainly a world where we're getting somewhere is that world, where it's coming down to the two of us.
Buttigieg later walked back that comment, saying it didn't come out right. Joining me now is Midwin Charles, a civil trial and criminal defense attorney with Midwin Charles and Associates, David Korn, Washington bureau chief of Mother Jones and author of Russian Roulette, Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino, Larry Sabato, director of the UVA Center for Politics and author of The Kennedy Half Century, and Tiffany Cross of the Beat DC, a super panel, as it were. So I want to talk about Julian Castro in a minute, because I do think In my opinion, he's probably the best candidate who isn't doing well, and I really can't explain why he isn't doing well, because I think he's a high-quality candidate. But just for a moment, I want to go back and talk about Kamala Harris, since we just had that interview, glitches and all. We had that interview with Kamala Harris. I just want to, and I'll start with you on this, Midwin. I just opened by asking her about the kind of obvious question, which is the challenge that she's having, even as a black woman candidate, in attracting the majority of the most central vote to Democrats, which is black women.
Right. Right, and I think that that's an important question, because she should be doing better, right? One would think black women are the moral backbone of the Democratic Party in many ways. We are the ones that come out and vote the most, in the largest numbers, and the most consistently for the Democratic Party. And of course, it's time that the Democratic Party recognize that, but I digress.
It would be nice.
Right, it would be nice, but I think that, I said this before when I was on the show last week, I think that she has been faced with a lot of problems that other candidates have not faced. Right? One is, I think, a lack of attention from a lot of media outlets. She has not received the same amount of attention as some of the other candidates. She does have to deal with name recognition, which is an issue that the top other candidates have. But yet, how do you explain the rise of Pete Buttigieg, right? Particularly when you compare him and recognize that he doesn't have the same level of experience.
Yeah.
He's the mayor of a small town, and his record there has been fraught with a lot of controversy.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually quite interesting that she isn't polling very well with black women, and I think it's because she's a prosecutor, and there are a lot of I think misinformation in terms of how her sort of record is with respect to jailing people and programs that she came up with and so forth. But I look forward to her making the case. I think she's a very good candidate. I think she's a very strong candidate. We've seen her in action as a senator, questioning people during confirmation hearings, and she's been quite excellent in doing that. And I think that the American people need to give her another look, especially black women.
And Tiffany, it's an interesting thing where, to me, the majority of the foundation, I mean, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, of what people think about Kamala Harris as a prosecutor came from one person, from this woman, Laura Bazelon, who wrote a piece in which she slammed her as not being progressive. And it feels like everyone just took that on its face, took her word for it, and then decided that's who Kamala Harris was, rather than sort of giving her a chance to ramp up and sort of tell the rest of the world who she is. That's one comment I'd love for you to respond to, if I could be wrong. And then on cable news coverage, I think, to the point that Midwin just made, look at the share. Let's just put up this number here. Hopefully you guys can see it where you guys are. Joe Biden got 39.7% of the 15-second cable news clips mentioning any candidate during a single week in October. Elizabeth Warren got 23%. Sanders got 17%. Tulsi Gabbard, who's polling in the ones and twos, got 15.4%. Pete Buttigieg, 6%. Kamala Harris is down at 3.8%. She doesn't get the mentions, and look at where all of the candidates of color are on that list as well. Tiffany.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of ridiculous that we have these conversations that, Mayor Pete is in the top tier of candidates, and he is not doing well at all with black people, and the media completely ignores Senator Kamala Harris, and it's ridiculous. There have been, the senator was very strategic in her announcement, rolling out. I mean, she stretched it out over a week. She, had that big press conference at Howard University here in D.C. She had the huge crowd in Oakland. That was great. After that, the media just kind of decided, yeah, we've moved on. And they gifted Mayor Pete Buttigieg with this praise before he had really earned it. And so I think now you're seeing some of the results from that. And I do, the New York Times piece that you referenced, look, I think that's part of an issue that, kind of spread like wildfire. But quite honestly, most of the Democratic electorate, they're not necessarily waking up reading the op-ed pages in the New York Times. I think that's something very much centered on the chatter class, or people who are political nerds like all of us who sit around and talk about it. And so I think that narrative got it kind of went viral from other people. And like we talked about on this show before, when Luke, wrote the op-ed about her, and the rapper from 2 Live Crew wrote the op-ed about her in the Miami paper, and then that got traction in Florida, a battleground state. Now he's a supporter. So I think there's blame to go around everywhere. I think, look, the senator's campaign recognized we need to build some allies here. We need to, take, control of our own coverage. But, there's a thing that you say you should never blame the voters. It's always, the candidate's fault. I'm going to to take a step away from that and say, no, we can blame the voters. When Senator Harris went on The Breakfast Club and had that interview with Charlamagne the God and DJ Envy, she talked about policy. She talked about her LIFT Act. She talked about her record as a prosecutor. What came out of that interview on the blogs and, the chatters at barbershops and beauty salons and, book clubs discussion was, did she really smoke weed, and who was she listening to, and Snoop's album didn't come out till later. Who gives a crap? Like, we have a crazy person in the White House. Let's focus on the substance of what she's talking about. So I think, the campaign probably could have done some different things going up to secure a home first, to secure that black base. You should never assume that black people are with you because you're the black candidate. But they've been doing a lot of work, and they have not gotten the recognition in the media. And I think that's largely because you might have a newsroom full of diverse people, but when you get to the editorial decision makers in most cable news outlets, they are not very diverse. And I think that reflects in the coverage, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Maria Teresa, because I feel like there is a similar story that one could tell about Julian Castro. It's not for lack of being available to media. We ask for all these candidates all the time. One of the ones who is most likely to say yes was Beto O'Rourke, but also was Julian Castro. He's very available to the media. He will come out and talk, easy to get booked on. So he's been pursuing a lot of media attention. He's a good candidate, but he is also not resonating in that top tier. Even among Latino voters, that poll was a little surprising to me, the Telemundo poll, where he's polling behind white candidates. Is there a similar thing that's happening where a lot of black voters are saying, you got to have an old white guy to beat an old white guy? And so a lot of people are saying, give me an old white guy because that's the only thing America will accept. And they're projecting what they think white working class people will accept and saying, we can only have what they want. And is that same thing, do you think, happening among Latino voters?
Well, I mean, that clip that you showed of who was covered in those 10 days, Julian wasn't even covered once. Right?
Yeah.
So I would say it's almost like the chicken and the egg. I think a lot of folks don't know who he is in the Latino community or in the mainstream. And he was a cabinet member. He was one of the mayors of one of the largest cities in the country. And he has policy that has moved all the other candidates towards him. Look at the immigration policy that he put forward. Before then, no one wanted to utter the word of actually creating something that was much more comprehensive. He uttered it on stage, and then everybody backpedaled, and now they're with him. And so it's not that he isn't a good candidate, is that he doesn't have a shot if he doesn't have fair representation in the media. That is the same for Kamala Harris. That's the same for Cory Booker. You just go down the list. And this is the thing. The more that I look at the coverage, my biggest concern is that we're using candidates that are traditional, that can secure traditional voters. But that's not the game this time around. The way that we were able to win the midterm elections, Joy, was because we literally expanded that political base. Exactly. So we made sure that we were able to secure suburban white women, but then we expanded the base when it came among young voters, and we expanded the base among young African-American voters, and we expanded the base just in general among Latino voters. None of the candidates that you put forward there right now that are leading the pack are actually expanding that base. So let's ask ourselves, why are we covering our politics by the people in a way that is comfortable to the establishment, instead of really asking the really tough questions of what are the policies that are going to excite and engage a new populace? We're leaving basically 15 to 20 million voters off on the table because we're not engaging them. We're not bringing them in. And that's what's going to be the game changer. If you look at Julian Castro's policies, this man has actually gone into the underbelly of Vegas, gone into the tunnels and talked to homeless people of why they're homeless. Many of them were homeless because they never recovered from the crisis of the housing crash in 2008. Many of them are because their families were, wrapped up in immigration, and sadly they were shipped off to another country, and they were DACA recipients. I mean, the stories that he is covering on the campaign trail are talking about the most marginalized, but the biggest possibility to excite an American base in ways we've never seen.
Yeah, and let me go to my media guy here, who's going to have to speak for all of the media now, David Corn. This is your job today. You speak for all the media.
Come on, David.
Because I'm telling you, we have these candidates on, so I'm not. We've tried to have them all on. They don't all say yes. I'm just going to say
no, but
they don't all say yes.
Right, but Joy, you're doing your due diligence. You're actually giving the opportunity for these individuals to come and talk, and then letting the audience actually
decide,
craft and create and decide. And that is the responsibility of every single anchor. The responsibility of let's be curious. Even if someone comes up with something that's off the wall, give them the platform to have this conversation, so that the audience can really decide. But right now, we are being shaped, sadly, by traditional traditional ways of thinking
Right.
of who the candidate should be versus actually allowing people to come into the conversation.
Let me get David in here, because David, there is a sense, and I think a lot of people both admire Pete Buttigieg in that he's able to come this far, you know, being a guy who won with 8,000 votes in a very small city. But then there is another side of this conversation that I know I hear a lot among people of color that I know that say, wait a minute, Julian Castro was the mayor of a city like 20 times the size. He's also a Rhodes Scholar. Cory Booker's a Rhodes Scholar. They're all, you know, lots of people, you know, speak multiple languages and have some of the same sort of, you know, sort of points of excellence in their lives. But you don't see people going, oh my God, Julian is a scholar who had this big city mayoralty. No one says that. They don't say that about Cory Booker. They do say it about him. And there's a sense that, well, he's more moderate. He's sort of, you know, kind of more in the Biden realm in terms of policy. So the media may be more comfortable with his policies. But why don't these other candidates get that same kind of love?
Well, you know, I think there's...
Or even Kamala, too. Same question.
You know, I'm surprised. I think Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Julian Castro are impressive people. You know, they've had impressive careers of public service. And I do think that each one of them, through, you know, the debates early on when they had everyone on the stage, even though they didn't get as much time, had some opportunity to speak to an audience in a crowded field. I mean, that's the issue here. It's a crowded field with some very well-known people who serve the needs of certain voters. There are some voters who are very happy with Elizabeth Warren, very happy with Bernie Sanders, and very happy with Joe Biden. So you then, you know, how do you cut into that? You know, Kamala Harris, remember, the first debate, or was it the second debate, had that moment when she challenged Joe Biden.
Right.
And she looked like a fighter. She looked really tough. I remember writing a piece saying this shows that she could go one-on-one with Trump, which is perhaps the most important characteristic that any of these candidates need. And, you know, then after that, she didn't seem to be able to exploit that. Pete Buttigieg, you know, had this tremendous media strategy at the very beginning of the campaign when he talked to everybody and he was, you know, seen as a wide open type of candidate and gave access to everyone in the media. He got columns written about, hey, who's this young fresh face? It was very smart and very clever, and that got him a little bit of an edge that we haven't seen other candidates and their media strategies be able to do. To get into the top tier when it's well-known people, you got to be really savvy, and I think it's great that MSNBC and Washington Post is going to have a debate with 10 of these people. I think it's great that you have them on, but it's harder for people who are less well-known, and that's just the bottom line thing they have to go up against, regardless of whether there are some racial biases that are baked into the Democratic electorate.
But let me get Larry in here, because Larry, the other challenge, and I do think this is a real phenomenon and isn't just anecdotal, that people are afraid. Right? They think the idea that a country could elect someone like Donald Trump says something very different about what it said when the country elected Barack Obama, right? The idea, even though Donald Trump lost the popular vote, the fact that there's any path for somebody who would cage little kids and take them from their parents, and that people still support him. You know, he still has a majority of white voter support, even though the children were taken from their parents. Little, you know, children. The fact that, you know, Muslims were banned. The fact that he's abusive in his language about women. That all of these things do not turn off a majority of white voters. That scares people. And so I think people say, well, maybe this is a country that isn't what I thought it was. Maybe we need a white guy, because maybe white voters will just not accept anything but that. And that is a thinking that people have, that they're afraid. Do you think that fear that maybe some of the electorate has is why people are standing behind a Joe Biden? I mean, look, Joe Biden wrote the crime bill. He's not getting the same demerits for that Hillary Clinton got. She was just married to the guy who signed it, right? So why? And, you know, you got Bloomberg in there, stop and frisk. That's not coming up. Do you think it's just fear?
Well, you know, I've actually heard people say this is not a year for making history, which really translates into let's nominate a white male. It's hard to interpret it any other way. Now, the motive behind it is one that I think the vast majority of Democrats support, which is the party shouldn't take chances in beating Trump. Democrats, I think, regard this as a national emergency, and an emergency requires a different kind of approach and answer. But at the same time, it does cut into the candidate field, combined with the feedback loop between the media and their own polling and polls conducted by other people. And the debates fit in there too. There was almost a rush to eliminate candidates, get them off the stage. And you saw this a lot on Twitter. Get them off the stage. Half of those people shouldn't even be on the stage. Well, who are you to determine that?
Right.
The whole point is we have an unusually large number of candidates. They all ought to be given a shot. One other point, Joy. I have also heard people say, and producers, political producers say, in explaining why they aren't covering candidates like Senator Harris more, well, they've had their shot. Meaning they went up in the polls for a while because of something. In Senator Harris's case, it was because in the first debate she went after Biden.
Yeah.
But then she went down again. Well, I would remind people of 2004, the Democratic contest, in which John Kerry was absolutely written off. He'd gone up and down, and people said he's out, and he became the nominee. What happened with John McCain in 2008? Everybody wrote him off. He even had to let all his campaign staff go. He had no money. Who ended up as the nominee? John McCain. So you never know about these things. You have to think of campaigns as roller coasters. They aren't straight lines, and that would encourage coverage for more candidates.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
And
can I say,
jump
Joy?
in, Tiffany, go ahead.
Yeah, and then I want to.
I just think it's also the way that the media ask these questions. So the media will constantly ask, hey, how do you, as Democratic voters or Democratic candidates, how do you plan on winning some of these swing state voters, which is really their euphemism for the white voters who voted for Trump and then voted for Obama, which we could spend a whole hour debunking all the ridiculousness that comes out of that storyline. But the thing is, that's really not a great question to ask Democratic candidates. Democrats don't need a majority of white voters to win a race. Democrats have not won the majority white vote since 1976, when the voting electorate was 89% white. Newsflash, it doesn't look like that anymore. So now we have to adjust how we interview these candidates. Also, I think Kamala Harris shows us a very interesting thing that we've always known, but perhaps the media doesn't. The black voters are not a monolith. And so when you go into some of these communities and you're talking about you went to an HBCU and you belong, a private college and you belong to a black sorority, that's not going to resonate with everybody. And so I think, her campaign has adjusted to speak to some of those. When we talk about black voters, particularly in the media, it's always black voters, that's it. You talk about white voters, it's white working class, white college educated women, suburban white voters. Well, guess what? Black voters disaggregate in the same way. And so because she resonates with some, black suburban moms, she might not do well with black, working class voters. And now she's, picking up steam there. So I think there's criticism all around, but particularly the media has to adjust to the changing demographics of this country, and they painfully have not.
Yeah, Midway.
No, I was just going to say, I think the point you made is something that I was going to say, at least a little bit differently. You are right in the sense where I think America is now in fear, right? This idea that we could have come from Barack Obama and end up with Donald Trump is frightening to a lot of people. And when I talk to a lot of voters, many of them say the exact same thing. We don't want to take a chance. There's no way a black person can win. There's no way a Latino person can win. There's no way a woman can win. And I think that that is one of the most successful things that Donald Trump has done, is he has convinced America that we perhaps are not moving forward. And people are now gripped with fear. And I think part of that also is a result of the media setting up this idea of obsessing over Trump voters. Remember, after he won, there were so many articles about Trump voters and about working class voters, always referring to them as white, as though black people aren't part of that, or Latinos or Asians or Muslims. But it was always about what they thought, what they want, how they're voting, what their needs are. And I think most of America has adopted that in the sense where we want to make sure that whoever this nominee is, that is a person that Trump voters would like as well. And I think that that's part of the problem, and you see it playing out in how these candidates are coming.
And David and Larry, I'm sorry, Larry first. Is that a legitimate? I mean, because the reality is that, to Tiffany's point, I'm pretty sure. I think Carter might not have even won. I think it's LBJ is the last Democrat to win a majority. I think Carter might have split them. But the reality is, the idea that the whole crux of the campaign comes down to white working class voters who are Republicans. They're almost all Republicans, but that the media is so fixated on them. They're so almost obsessed with what they want, what will move Trump voters. They keep re-interviewing Trump voters. Do you still like them now? Do you like them now? Do you like them now? But what about today? Do you like them today? Did you like them this morning? It's all the time.
Like no one else exists.
No one else
and they're only 1/3 of the U.S. population.
And they're a small population.
Small
Well,
I don't remember that kind of curiosity about Obama voters.
I don't remember ever that happening. Yeah. So Larry, isn't it the case that the growing portion of the electorate is the non-white working class voter and the non-white non-working? That is actually the growing part, no?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you're also correct. LBJ was the last Democratic candidate. This is in 1964 to get a majority of the white vote. It's incredible when you think about that, given the number of Democratic candidates who've actually won the presidency, but nobody's been able to do that since Johnson. Look, here's the other problem. The media still believes that there are millions of swing voters who are ready to move away from Trump and toward a Democrat, or for that matter, in the other direction. It just isn't true. We're living in the most polarized era of our lifetimes. Hardly anybody's moving. Everybody is in their foxholes, and no one's crossing the DMZ. And it isn't going to happen next year either.
Nope. I 100% agree.
Well, I think this is where the opportunity is. When we keep talking about the fact that we haven't had a majority white vote for a Democratic candidate, we're kind of also missing the fact that we have roughly 12 million young people that are going to be eligible to vote for the very first time. They're going to be the largest voting bloc, more than baby boomers. What efforts are we doing to close that voter registration gap? The same thing with the Latino community. We have 15 million Latinos that are not registered, but when they are registered, 79% of them vote. What are campaigns doing to close that registration gap? What are they doing to engage them, to get them excited to come out and vote? Because you're right, this is not politics as usual, but if you don't vote, that is also a statement. If you stay home, if you are not inspired just because you don't see yourself in the system, that is also a statement. And quite frankly, when Trump is trying to create fear, he's also trying to make sure that people stay home. That is an absolute tactic that he's doing. So we have to think creatively. We know how to do this work, and we have to make sure that we are expanding that electoral base.
Yeah, and David,
I would just add, to get back to the candidates, it's really the responsibility of every candidate in a field this big to somehow find a way to seize the imagination of voters, to excite the people that MT was just talking about. And so, you know, in some ways, I do think Kamala Harris, to go back to where we started, had a chance to do that. And she had a little bit of success this past week. She got some criticism, too, because she put out a bold plan about what to do with kids after school. I do think that all these other candidates who are trying to edge their way in, it's very difficult. But they have to find a way to engage voters because they're up against this name recognition barrier that has always been hard for every candidate who's not on the other side of it to break through to.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, I can't help but wondering, what could the millions of dollars that a couple of billionaires are about to spend on their own campaigns
boy, don't get me started.
How many voters deregistered? I'm just saying, Midwin, Maria, Teresa, and Tiffany will be back later on. I'm just saying words. David Korn and Larry Sabato, thank you all very much. Coming up.